Hey everyone, this time I plan on going through all the new payload versions from 3.60 to the one that was just released at the time of this recording today at 3.65. So really looking forward to getting through and learning more about all the features, bug fixes, and everything else that's been released up to this point. On the last video, I got through version 3.59, and so we'll pick it up with 3.60. There's a link to the repo in the description. Let's go ahead and jump in and start looking at 3.60. We're going to go line by line and look through all of the features. And here, the first one is that we can accept multiple locales in the fallback locale. And what this essentially is you can just provide an array now. And so what will happen is if you set a locale, so we have our locale set to English here in this example, and then you set your fallback locale, if English isn't available, then it'll fall back to the French translation. If the French translation isn't available, it'll fall back to the Spanish translation. So this is one of many localization improvements that Payload CMS is doing. I've heard from a couple of people as I've been interacting on Reddit and other channels that localization is probably not the strongest part of Payload CMS, so it's really good to see that more localization enhancements are coming, and this being one of them. There's the ability now to add the settings menu to the navigation sidebar. So first, we actually need to, I didn't do this, need to upgrade from 3.59. We'll look at 3.60.0. Okay, so 359.0, 360.0, replace all, do pn pmi, just like we did last time, and then we're going to, as soon as that's done, clear out our next folder. There we go. So next, we should be upgraded here. Now, the settings menu, let's go ahead and just spin up our development server, pull that up, and come over to the admin panel and log in. So we can look here at admin components settings menu. We can go over to our payload config. We'll go to our admin and we'll start with components because we don't have that yet. And then we'll do settings menu, which is going to look for a custom component or an array of custom components at least. So there is no default, which means then we need to come into, we'll go to our source. We'll just add a new directory called components. And in the component, we'll have our settings menu. We'll just do item and then index.tsx. We'll create that file. Then I'm just going to make this super simple. We're going to export test item just to make it easy. Export constant test item. And then we just want to return, we'll say a div with a paragraph tag of test item for sidebar. And then we'll just export default test item, come up to our config again, take our settings menu, and then here we're going to need our path, components, settings menu item, and then index.tsx. And since this is the default export, I don't need to include test item like this because this is how you do named exports. This is for default exports. So now we'll want to generate import map. So here we can now see the gear icon. If I click on it, I can see test item for sidebar. So this, of course, is not very helpful. So why don't we do something like a link? And we'll do it from payload UI. We can do href, and we'll just do the home page. So now if I click on this, it'll go over to the home page. So that's probably a little bit more useful. Or if you wanted like a specific media, or if you wanted a link to some logs, or even if you wanted to do a link to just any one of your collections here, you could do that as well. So that's really easy to set up, and you just get to make it however you want. So that covers this one. Then there's some plugin multi-tenant stuff. This is where their example code is going to come in handy because I don't have multi-tenant set up, and that takes a while to set up, so I'm not going to do it. But you can now have access overrides at the collection level. So here you can set if something is supposed to be shared, for example, and if it's true, you can override the access by the key. So some of the props passed in would be the result, the key, and the request. So the key, of course, would be like read, update, delete, and create. Then the result is what's returned here from your return statement, and then the request would be things like your payload or your user. So you can do that now with multi-tenant, collection access overrides. You can now assign multiple tenants per document. So the tenant field override now includes has many relationships. So if you want multiple documents assigned to multiple tenants, you can now do that. In a similar vein, you have the user collection access overrides, where you get a function that does the same thing that we talked about up here with the access result override, but instead for the user access result override. So now you can again check for read, create, update, and delete. You get more arguments, but you get the key and the access result. And you're able to overwrite and override whatever user access result you need to override for the multi-tenant plugin. So that was 3 quick hit things for the multi-tenant plugin. You can now add collection filtering to the upload feature, which is a pretty big deal. You can enable and disable collections that can be used in a upload feature. So for example, if we had 2 media collections, I'll just copy our media and do something like documents. Do documents, just get all of this set up to be right. We don't need an alt text for document. We'll leave the fields array empty. Then we'll come to our payload config, register our documents collection, make sure that imported correctly. It sure did. So we can go back to our users collection, which does have the uploads feature. And what we'll set up is enabled collections. We'll just say media and documents, which is not in our types quite yet. But when I regenerate our types, which is what I just did, we can come over to our dashboard here. So we have documents, we have media, we can go to our users, which has this lexical field. We can do an upload, and I can select which collection I want to browse. So it's going to default to media because media comes first, and then document comes second. So it's not alphabetized, it's by the order in which you organized your enabled collections. Now, if I get rid of documents and refresh, go back to upload, I lose that ability. So I'm not able to see the document collection anymore. So if you have a ton of collections and you only want to exclude 1 or 2, you'll want to use disabled collections. Or again, if you have 12 collections for media, but you only want to include 1 or 2, you'll want to do enabled collections. So I will just remove this because I want all of my collections to be available here in my lexical rich text block, which now they both are. Great. So we have added collection filtering to upload feature, which we just talked about. So what's really important here is that we see that there's a new code block, which is easy to import as a block in our blocks feature. So for bug fixes, the blocks as JSON property was added to the D1 SQLite. This mimics now what can happen in Postgres, where you can actually have a whole column that holds JSON, just similar to what it would be done in MongoDB. So great new feature there for SQLite. The HTML converter feature has officially been deprecated. That has been known for a while, but now there's a JS doc saying that it's deprecated. Cool. All right, so that's it for 3.60. We'll move along to 3.61.1. So I will stop this, take 3.60, change it to 61.1, replace all, delete next, PNPMI. Let's start looking at some of the features here. Oh, here is the MCP. We'll take more of a deep dive into the MCP plugin, but essentially what it does is it turns your Payload CMS instance into an MCP server. It gives you the ability to communicate with your collections and have, for my example, Claude Code, create posts, create pages, create whatever you want based on the permissions you give it. So it does a lot of cool things. You can make your own prompts, you can make your own tools. There's just so much you can do with it. We'll be taking a look at this in a little bit. Now let's take a look at the bug fixes. So one bug fix that comes to mind here is this: TypeScript requires fields when draft true despite passing draft true. What this means is that fields during validation, we're still tripping payload and preventing it from saving that document, even though draft is supposed to bypass validation. Like, you're not supposed to fill out all the required information when you're in draft. So now that's fixed as of 3.61. The slug field now accepts localizations. The localization argument was not available, so there is now a way to localize the slug. That looks to be it for 3.61. 3.61.1 was just bug fixes. Where now, before closing a doc drawer with edits, you're asked instead of it just closing and losing all of your changes. So that's it for 3.61 and 3.61.1. So we can move up to 3.62, which was also a pretty big update. So I don't know why I did it this way. Oh, well, I'm glad I did, because 3.62.1 is also a bug fix, which we'll talk about, because I remember that actually being an issue. So let's go ahead and select all of these and replace all. Do P and PMI again. So for features, we have jobs access control now, where you can access either the queue or the cancel. So if I come over to our payload config, I've got my jobs here, and you can provide access. With the access, this is how you can tell Vercel or any other serverless platform that they can communicate with your cron. You can set a header and have the header be an environment variable in your deployment, and then your deployment will tell payload to run or schedule a job. So that's one way you can use access. Now you can also have specific accesses for your queue as well as your cancel. So we don't really have any access controls, but just to show it off, we can just do request. And for this request, we'll just do request user email is equal to my email. Do the same thing here. And so now what this is going to do is only the user with this email address can queue a new job. Only this user with this email can cancel a job. So if another user or an external site or anything else tries to queue or cancel jobs, it will be rejected. So this is one way that you're able to now more granularly queue and cancel your jobs with specific users. We now have a per field time zone configuration. So if we go over to our page, for example, we can create a new field, which will be a date field. Do type date, then name of date. Then we'll have a time zone. We'll have a default time zone of America, New York, which is the time zone I'm in. But we'll also have supported time zones, which will be an array. And we will have a label of New York, for example, value of America, New York, and then do this again, but with Los Angeles, for example. And so now I can save this and then generate import map and types and then run the development server. And we'll want to go to our pages. Got to delete next real quick. And I can see that I have a date with a time zone of New York. I can switch it to Los Angeles. If I wanted to enforce a time zone, I could do that with just setting one time zone and setting the default to that time zone. And so now that's enforced. I can't change that. And so this is different because you would have to set a time zone at the config level. You would have to set it at the admin level. So this gives you some more granularity in where you're defining your time zones. So it's per field now instead of just at the global level. So big update was this KV storage adapters. This is something that I'll have to come back and play with a little bit, but this is just key value storage with the ability to do in-memory database and Redis for enhanced data persistence and performance. This is for the foundation of the upcoming real-time API. So exciting features coming up. but the whole thing is that it's fast, it's key value access, and it'll allow you to be flexible in where you get those key value stores. So you can set that up in your payload. So we can just set up KV here. So you have the ability for a couple of adapters. So you can do your database adapter, which this isn't going to import automatically yet. You can also do in memory. So I'll do this one, KV adapter. So I can copy this and we're going to import, I don't have to copy it. So I can do in memory, KV adapter. And then you of course have Redis as well. So I will generate import map and type since I edited my config. Refresh. You can use in your local API, for example, we've got payload here. We can do const kv, do await payload kv, and then here you can do things like, and then you can do something like clear. There we go. So you can clear your KV, you can delete anything with the key. So you want the key to delete. You can get the key, you can check if it has a key, you can list the keys, and you can set the key and the values. I'm not going to do any of that right now because this is a bigger package that's going to take some time to explore fully. So I'll move on down to the configurable toast position. So bottom right is the default, which we can see if we were to say delete this, we see the toast show up in the bottom right. But now if we go back to our payload config, we can go into our toast option and set position. Say I don't want it in the bottom right, but I want it in the top center. If I go to pages and I make an update here, we can now see updated successfully there. So you can move it around wherever you want, where maybe I want it bottom center instead. So I'll set that. Oh, and I can see the toast pop up right there. So one bug fix that kind of broke version 3.62 that was quickly patched, which is why 3.62.1 came out. All Postgres users were having to create a new migration. You now don't have to do that if you start with 3.62.1 or higher. So when you enable KV, you honestly don't want to have to create a migration because that's just a hassle. But now with this bug fix, you don't have to do that. All right, so we can move up to 3.63. So we'll do that, 3.63. So I can copy this and then replace all, remove next. And then we're going to run pnpmi. Let's take a look here. We have polymorphic uploads. We'll create an upload field. So I will do that. And then we will do a type of upload. We will do a name of upload. We'll do a relation to as an array with media and documents. First, I'll generate import map, generate types, and then run pnpm dev. And then I can refresh, and the pages should load up with a new upload field. I'll just click and drag it in here, and I'm able to set either media or document. So this also works with bulk upload. So I only uploaded one image, but what you would do is I could set the test alt, and then I would be able to move forward or edit all, and then I can choose between media and document. So, and it's aware that media requires alt and document does not. So the alt field goes away. So I don't need to upload this, but now you can see polymorphic uploads in action. And now there's a new UI option to duplicate your locale. So you can duplicate a page into locale. As I mentioned earlier in this video, we're now starting to see lots of localization updates with Payload. This is just more support for localization in general. And this is just a UI feature. I wonder if it's something I can show real quick. If I do config, I can do localization. So let's take a look at our localization config. So we just need our locales and the default locale. So we can do locales. We'll do English, Spanish, French. Default locale will be English. That should be all we need to do. So we have locale there, and then I can copy to locale, and then I can copy it to whichever locale I want. And I can override existing field data if this already exists, or I can just leave this unchecked. So if I copy this, I now have locale testing, I don't have text localized. So if I go to page, and I don't care about data loss here, do not do this if you care about your data. So I'm just going to put localization or localized true here in text. And that's luckily going to keep my data, but your data may disappear if you try doing that. So I've got my locale there in Spanish, then I can do testing here in English, and now I can change between locales. If I wanted to, testing in French, I will copy this, and then French doesn't have anything, but I could copy from Spanish. So copy from Spanish to French will overwrite existing field data. We see el ensayo show up here for text, and then I can change that for French. So that's the duplicate for localization. So super helpful tool for those using localization. There is some work happening for Next.js. If you are interested in getting Next.js up and running for your Payload app, there is a Next.js 16 temporary Discord channel. I would check that out, give feedback there. That's going to be the quickest and best way to get Next.js 16 working with Payload. As far as I understand, it's on Next.js to get working with Payload, but we should see support for 16 come pretty quickly. Then we can come up to 3.64, which now I'm going to check every time that 0.1 does not exist, so I don't have to keep scrolling up. But I can replace 3.63 with 3.64. We'll need to remove our next folder, run pnpmi, and now we can start looking at this. You now have UTC time zone and date fields. So if you ever want to use coordinated universal time, you can do that now in your time zones. We have that. So let's go ahead and go to our page. And in our time zone, I could just do label coordinated universal time. I don't know what this is trying to suggest, but value, this just needs to be UTC. Then we can run our development server and generate our types and import map while we're at it. And then let's set this as our default, just so we see it pop up right away. So when I refresh, I need to set the value. So I can set UTC. The reason that didn't work at first is that I have my document here saved with New York time zone, but if I get rid of this, it can show up now as coordinated universal time. So I save that, and then now that's what I see. So that's the UTC time zone. There is now build support for TurboPack. Again, that's default in Next.js 16, so this is more work just to get supported on Next.js 16. Now we have in our MCP plugin, so this is what I was mentioning earlier, some updates that are happening. I have 3.65 here, but we're not quite there yet. This is 3.64. I have my MCP server working on my posts. Now what I can do, I can add a before read hook. And what this is going to do is now I can check if my request has the payload API, and from that payload API is the value MCP, then that means that it's being read by the MCP server instead of through the local API, for example. So I can change the behavior that I want from my MCP server. So doc title MCP hook override. So I'm probably in the wrong spot. That's probably a field hook. So let's go ahead and look for my collection hooks, which is where this actually is. So I can save this. I'm going to run pnpm dev. And while that loads up, I'm going to start Claude. Claude is going to have some MCP servers, which apparently I need to reconnect because it has been a minute. I don't care about this API key. Do whatever you want with it. It's not an actual API key, so now I can start Claude. I can look at my MCP servers. I see it down here connecting, so that's good. All right, so we got verbose logs showing up. We're good now. Again, if you want to see how to actually set this up, video coming out on Monday for it at the time of this recording. So we have this in our posts index. We have our title, so I can check. So return all post titles. So ideally what this does is it returns the doc title with the MCP hook override. So I can hit yes. Sometimes I get this maximum allowed tokens, which is weird. I don't know why it does that. It feels weird telling it to have to follow the instructions. And then now I can see, since the MCP hook override is included in the doc title here, so the before read hook is telling Claude before you read this document to change the title to MCP hook override. So this isn't something that we'll see in our local API because we only have that for the MCP. Let's see what the other option is here. So local, for the local API, REST API, and GraphQL. So that's it there. Let's move back to our features released in 3.64. We have the custom auth configuration also for the MCP plugin. You can override your authentication. So instead of using the API key that I did, if you want your own authentication or authorization rather, you can have that set up here. There's now also translation support for the redirect plugin. I have a video out on the redirect plugin, but I do not have time to go into the redirect plugin here. In your internationalization object, you can provide translations for your redirects plugin. So in English, the plugin redirects the from URL will be source URL, which is a custom title here just based on what this says. In German, you can provide a different way to read the redirects plugin fields. So more support for internationalization and localization. Like I've mentioned a couple times now, Payload does have that prioritized and more features are coming out very quickly. So this is a big deal. The Slate editor, this was always going to happen. So with Payload 3 coming out, both Slate and Lexical were supported, but it was very clear that Lexical was going to take the place of Slate eventually. So now we can see that the Slate editor is being deprecated in favor of Lexical. So if you use Slate, know that its days are numbered. There have been some additional job queue documentation. I've seen this show up. I will say that just so you're not alone, the documentation for job queues, not even just the documentation, the job whole feature set of Payload CMS is pretty confusing. So it takes some work in getting used to actually use it, but it is doable. I have a couple of projects using it. I've seen people use it. You just have to really fiddle with it a little bit in order for it to work like you want it to, but it does work, I promise. I also have a video out on how to use the job queue, at least to schedule posts, so feel free to check that out as well. So that's 3.64, and that brings us to, as of today, 3.65. I need to come over to our payload config, take our 3.64 and replace it with 3.65. And there is no 0.1. This just came out today. We need to run p-npmi and then import map types in p-npm dev. Cool. So we are upgraded. There is now, that's a word, augmentable interfaces for collection and global custom properties. So this is plugin specific. Good to know. So this is where you would add the ability to insert fields for plugins. So for plugin development, you can use this to keep your plugin type safe. So that helps with developing external plugins to add fields that you may not know exactly how they're going to interact with other people's collections. And so you now can do this in a type safe way. So that's all this means. But now you have collection custom, collection admin custom, which is what I was seeing there, and then global custom and global admin custom. So both for collection and for global. Here, the payload instance cache key, I want to take a look here. So this extends on how you can now run multiple instances of the get payload instance. So now you can specify what the cache key is and how you handle endpoints and create payload request. So more complex feature, more advanced feature. So it may not apply to many of the people using Payload CMS, but it is something that is available when you're using custom endpoints. So here it does call out that it's useful for multi-tenant scenarios, which is not something I do a lot of. So if you use multi-tenant, this is something that would make sense for you. So now you can control MongoDB connection lifecycle using hooks. There's the after open connection and after create connection. And so you can use this for connection pulling in serverless environments, but you get to do this in a way that you control the logic. So you're able to handle exactly how you want your connection pulling to work in Vercel functions. Now we've got localization support for the MCP plugin. This is not actually something that I'm going to look into because I don't have localization set up in the other project, but you can tell your AI of choice to create content in English, Spanish, or all translations, or get all translations. So you can do this now with all MCP tools using locale and fallback locale parameters. So this brings it up to date with the REST API as a way to communicate with and query data. You can now use the payload request in MCP handlers. So again, I do have my MCP project up and up to date. So we can see in the handler for tool, prompt, and resource. So I see that in my contents, I have some issues here. So let me just get rid of that type error. But now in my, oh, this is not configurable. So we got our handler here. So handler, we got args. Why don't I do something like args rec, oh, extra. So this is going to be message. So now I can come in here. I could do something like rec payload locale would be better. And if that exists, we can get the locale. If not, undefined. Perfect. Okay, so you do have all of those options now. And now there's one last UI option here that now allows you to get the block selector for the blocks drawer for use for external use. And you have a new onSelect callback for custom side effects when blocks are selected. So let's take a look at this. This is going to be mostly for custom fields and how like you can extend payload. It's just a way to get the block selector component and get it from the blocks drawer. So the block selector, let's see if I have a project up and running. I don't. So this is the block selector. So this is the component that you're getting. And then this is the block drawer. So if I hit this, this is the onSelect. And if you want something to happen in between the selection of it from the drawer to what we see now, you can do that using onSelect as a callback function. All right, let's take a look at the bug fixes. Postgres 18 wasn't working with payload, so the suggestion was always to go back down to Postgres 17. There's now support for Postgres 18 in version 3.65. So if you were using Postgres and you wanted to use the newest version, version 18, you can do that now. Block names didn't get loaded with the rich text lexical field, so now those get loaded. There have been some updates to the MCP docs as well. That was one of the big complaints coming into the beta, is that the docs weren't very good in getting started. So now those have been updated and make it easier to get started with the MCP plugin. And that will continue to get better as more people use it and provide feedback for the feature. This is a breaking change. So if you were using the override config for the MCP plugin, it's no longer there. So if you find your project breaking when you go to 3.65, make sure you check the override config for the MCP plugin. That takes us all the way from version 3.60 to 3.65. So I now have a fully updated project and also a fully updated MCP server. If you found this content helpful, make sure you like and subscribe. Your support means so much to me. I also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. It's called Next in Dev. There's a link to that in the description, as well as my Patreon, which you can find as well in the description. Any support helps me continue creating content that seems to help so many people. So really appreciate your support. If you have any comments or questions, suggestions, I'd love to hear from you. So make sure you leave a comment. And until then, I'll see you on the next one.